How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 3.
My fellow Americans, I am delighted to have you with me. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Want to set the record, make it a little more clear for you with the Haitian situation in Springfield, Ohio, is they're illegal aliens. The Biden administration classified a lot of them as illegal given the Haitian situation back in Haiti. They were allowed to come into this country as illegal immigrants, not illegal immigrants. And they weren't all just dropped off in Springfield, Ohio at one time. It was a wave that headed up there, replacing jobs, and then the Biden administration encouraged more to go. So there's a 20,000, but it did not happen all at once, but over time. And they're not illegal aliens per se. They're allowed to be here by the Biden administration. Some of them actually came during the Trump administration, but expedited during the Biden administration. So, but still, it's a wild story there. Talk about, this is what happens, by the way, when progressives decide there's no need for a melting pot, when progressives decide that we can be a salad bowl where every culture stays the same and we're all piled in together without any need to assimilate. A country cannot survive if its immigrant populations do not assimilate into the country and take on the characteristics of the population already there. Choosing to stay apart and distinct is not healthy for any society. Now, I'm going to move on to something else. Got some folks on hold who want to talk about it. I will get to your calls, but first, need to talk about something else. Here's one of my great concerns that I hope gets fleshed out in the debate tomorrow, and I don't know that it will. That is the size and scope of the federal government. I do not want to revisit ad nauseum, the whole Winston Churchill Hitler stuff from last week with Tucker Carlson. But I got to add a side note to it that's relevant to this. There are a growing number of mostly younger men on the right who all have the same freaking haircut. All of them. They all got the same haircut. It's wild. These rugged individualists who all sound the same, think the same, get the same haircut, wear the same clothes, and mouth off on social media about the post-war consensus. And many of them have actually decided that the outcome of World War II was bad and we were on the wrong side. And one of the many things they want to do is they want to use the government in the way they perceive the left using the government. In other words, they want to use government as a weapon against their enemies because they perceive that the left has used government as a weapon against their enemies, and they have no desire to actually gut the government. They want to use the government. And their argument is that if we gut the government, we can't engage in retribution against the left. They will have been able to use the government against us, and we won't be able to get retribution. Now, what's so ironic here is that many of these same people are so-called Christian nationalists, and Scripture's very clear. Jesus says that he will be the agent of revenge. Let him handle the revenge. You go love your neighbor, and you can turn the other cheek, and he'll take care of it for you. And these guys are like, no, we don't worship that Jesus. We worship the one who threw the money changers out of the temple, and we want to beat everybody up. It's very wild. The growth of government, though, is a problem. Brian Westbury is a well-known economist, chief economist with First Trust Limited Partnership. and a pretty prominent free market economist. And he's got a graph up today, real GDP growth in small and big government eras. And this is his tweet. Let me read it to you. Politicians tell us all the time, give us more money and we will create wealth and jobs. Here's the reality. Real gross domestic product was above or near 4% growth whenever we kept government contained. But in the last 20 years, with the biggest federal government ever, real growth has slowed to just 2%. If you want to understand what this means, at 4% growth, we double every 18 years. At 2% growth, it doubles every 36 years. No wonder houses aren't affordable and people feel like it's harder to get ahead. The bigger the government gets, the harder it is to grow. The harder it is to grow for the middle class. Do you know one of the groups the Bolsheviks campaigned against? Now, there were a lot of groups the Bolsheviks campaigned against when Lenin was taking over the Soviet Union and in the Russian Revolution. But one of the groups, one of the specifically targeted groups of people were the farmers. The Bolsheviks hated the farmers. In fact, they hated the bourgeois. I had to explain this to a friend a couple weeks ago because it sounds so counterintuitive. The bourgeois, you know who the bourgeois are? They're the middle class. More precisely, in common usage, they're the upper middle class. They're not the billionaires. They're not even the millionaires. They're the upper middle class, making low to mid six figures, running small businesses. The Bolsheviks hated the farmers because they argued that by controlling land and cattle, the farmers were controlling the means of production, and in controlling the means of production, they were allocating resources to their benefit and not the benefit of all the people. And therefore, we needed the government to take over all the farms, kill the farmers, and put everyone else in charge. And what do we have? Mass starvation in the Soviet Union. The Bolsheviks, the communists, they hate the middle class, particularly the upper middle class, small business owners, because they believe the small business owners control the capital, and in controlling the capital, they're controlling the capital to their benefit and the benefit of their family. Now, in reality, the way we work in a capitalist system, the way we're supposed to work in a capitalist system, is by letting individuals control the capital. Those individuals deploy it to benefit themselves. And in benefiting themselves, they engage in what's called an arm's length transaction. And so the people they engage with are engaged for their own benefit. And by both sides working for their own individual benefit, they compromise on something that benefits them both. And all the ships rise with the tide in arm's length capitalist transactions. The left, and now even some on the right, though, they don't like the small business owners. Those on the right who don't like the small business owners, well, the small business owner might be a progressive. And because they're progressive, they're giving their money to the Democrats. It's against their own interests. You hear this a lot these days on both sides. The left can't understand why the working class would vote against their interests. Donald Trump would be so bad for them. Maybe we shouldn't listen to people who think that they know what your best interest is better than yourself. That's the whole point of free markets. In a free market, you yourself have your best interest at heart, not the government. The government has the collective at heart. And this is the problem for this modern strain of republicanism. And just like the progressives on the left, the progressives on the right, they're all about the government knows best to do for you. And the result is that as the government grows, the middle class gets smothered. The more government you have, the less private sector you have. The private sector allocates wealth through arm's length transactions. The government allocates wealth through dictate and bureaucrat. And arm's length transactions are more efficient. And the problem that both the Democrats and Republicans have right now is that the leaderships of the parties are not really committed to shrinking the government. Donald Trump, in fact, gave his big speech last week, and he wants to use tariffs. In fact, Donald Trump made a wild claim that if we just add tariffs, we'll be able to replace what we're getting, or we'll be able to close the federal deficit. Now, here's the thing. You can do the math. You do a 10% tariff. We know from the private sector. We don't even have to know it from the government sector. We know it from the combined data of the private sector that we generate like $3.1 trillion in international trade. If you add a 10% tariff, I'm not great at math, but this one's easy. That's about $310 billion in revenue from tariffs. So let's just keep the math simple. For $3 trillion in international trade that we do, you add a 10% tariff like Donald Trump wants, that's going to generate $300 billion static. That's important here. The word static is important. And our national deficit every year is about $1.8 trillion minimum. So his claim that we're going to be able to pay off the deficit every year by adding the tariff is wrong, and that's if it's static. But it's not static. What's one of the reasons for the tariff? One of the reasons for the tariff is to reallocate resources to domestic production, which would be actually more expensive than foreign production, even with the tariff, and therefore it would continue to generate less and less money as we repatriate more and more capital. So you're never actually going to close the deficit. It makes no sense. But at the same time, what's the Democratic solution? It's to grow the government into every resource of our lives. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans actually have a responsible treatment for dealing with the size and scope of the federal government. And as the size and scope of the federal government grows, the private sector shrinks, and therefore the middle class shrinks. The reason you people can't buy houses right now is because government's grown so much. Government has sapped money from the private sector that would go to your paycheck, that would boost your pay enough to be able to make the minimum down payment now, which has gone up something like $60,000 to $105,000 as a minimum necessary for a down payment on a reasonably sized house these days. It's insane. And neither party wants to deal with the size and scope of government, but government has got to be gutted. And the side benefit for those of you on the right who want to use government as a weapon against the left to pay them back, if you actually gut the government, the left thrives on and needs government for power. So you gut the government, you deprive the left of their power. If you get rid of the institutions of government the left needs for power, you get rid of the left's ability to control power, and you return it to the people. And so you actually accomplish your goal of giving retribution to the left by taking away the thing they want and need the most, power. Brian Westbury's right. Donald Trump, I learned today, by the way, and I'm sure it's not just me, I'm sure it's others as well, but I learned today that there is someone whose job it is to listen to my show every day from that campaign. So whoever you are, God bless you for having put up with me. And two, if you would just remind the campaign that by cutting the size of the federal government, you grow the size of the private sector. And the private sector spends money more reliably, more efficiently, and better so that more people can make higher incomes and buy houses. You want to solve the housing crisis in the country? Cut the federal government so the private sector can thrive. AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry. Everybody's talking about it. Billions of dollars invested, so buckle up. The problem is AI needs a lot of speed and processing power. So how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud. Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less like Uber, 8x8, Databricks, Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/Erickson, Erickson. That's oracle.com/Erickson, oracle.com/Erickson. Go check them out today. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the nation. The phone number 877-973-7425. Scott, going to go to you next. Welcome to the show. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Eric, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. I just was talking earlier about the non-citizen, legal or illegal immigrants being sent voter registration cards, and I can affirm that because my wife has been married to for 30 years, and she's been stateside 27 of those years, and it never fails. Every election, whether it be local, state, federal, they send her mail, text, call her on the phone, and what makes it even more interesting is actually use her name, so they know who she is.
Good grief.
So, but yeah,
and not a citizen.
Yeah, not a citizen. Yeah, she's a legal resident alien.
Wow.
So I just want to give your listeners that, yes, it is true. We've been here 27 years stateside, and ever since the technology has updated since, 99, 2000, telephones got out, emails have become more popular. Even though she doesn't use a lot of email, yes, she uses her phone. She's got other apps that she uses, but she is a foreign national that is here legally in the United States. And she gets, like you said, emails, texts. She just got a text last week from the Harris campaign talking about convicted felon Trump. So it is out there, and it does happen.
Yeah, look,
so I'll let you get back to it. Yeah.
I'm glad you stuck around to make that point. And yes, I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. There's Scott, his wife, a legal, not illegal, but legal alien resident of the United States who the Harris campaign is trying to get to go register to vote. Now, living in Georgia, she won't be able to. You fill out the form. And just so you understand this, no one can stop you from filling out the form. But once the form is processed, the identifier is your social security number, and that is automatically by law in every county in the state of Georgia. It has to. They can't even opt out of it. They have to put your information in the computer, and that number is mandatory. And when that number is put in, it is automatically sent to the Department of Homeland Security computer system and comes back and says legal or illegal, yes or no. There's no way around it in the state of Georgia, but in many states, they don't use that system. And all Chip Roy's trying to do with the SAVE Act is get everybody to use the system Georgia uses, where you're immediately, when you're put into the system, it's a manual entry form. You put in that person's social security number, it immediately goes to the Department of Homeland Security database, where either citizen or non-citizen, and the non-citizen can't be registered. It's a common sense solution. We know illegal aliens have voted in this country. We know resident aliens have voted in this country, and we know they're not supposed to. So improve the system. Even if it's small, it's still happening. Improve the system. Hillsdale College actually has a course you can take on citizenship that's completely free from Victor Davis Hanson. You can get so much from Hillsdale College for free. You can get, for example, Imprimus, which I get on a regular basis. You can get Hillsdale College's class courses. You can get their podcast network. All you do is go to ericforhillsdale.com, E-R-I-C-K, ericforhillsdale.com. Let me just talk to you about their Constitution one that you get at ericforhillsdale.com. You can take this at no charge. And I have learned stuff that, this was my specialty in undergrad, and it did great in law school and common law. And I learned stuff from the nuances of the Great Compromise and the ordeal in Philadelphia when they were writing the Constitution, why the Constitution is structured the way it is. Go to ericforhillsdale.com today, E-R-I-C-K, ericforhillsdale.com. You can start getting this. It's all free. The podcast network, Imprimus, the classes, ericforhillsdale.com. Start a relationship with Hillsdale College today. You'll be smarter than your neighbors and well informed about this country. Hello, friends. How are you? It's Eric Erickson here. The phone number is 877-973-7425. should you wish to be on the program, I want to spend a little more time on the competitive nature and the size and scope of government, because there's actually something out you may not hear about in other talk radio programs. Mario Draghi has released a report on EU competitiveness, and I need to do a more expansive thing. My goal here is to remind you that we are the most awesome country on the planet. First, you should know that the Chinese, a tale as old as the communist regimes, they're having food shortages in China. That's right. Xi Jinping risks social unrest in China. He is, his government controls, among other things, and he is causing food shortages. The Chinese economy allegedly is growing. They've been in a depression in China. This hasn't got a lot of international coverage, but they've been in a depression in China. Depressions are bad. Like we all think, just bear with me here. And I admit going into this, I'm not an expert, but I know the basics enough to be able to competently deal with this. You all want prices to come down. You actually don't want prices to come down. What you want is your incomes to go up. Now, follow along with me here. A recession is when the economy shrinks. The metric of a recession is 2 quarters of negative economic growth. So your economy shrinks. A depression is when the prices of everything collapse. So inflation is when prices go up, and deflation is when prices go down. And you and I have been thinking the whole time we could use some deflation here. The problem here is a deflationary event becomes a depression, and here's why. Think of all the people out there who are employed right now. Now suddenly the price of every good and service collapses and goes down. Suddenly people are making more money than all of their companies are bringing in because the prices of everything collapsed. So there becomes mass unemployment and people can't get jobs. And then your wages, you have to go work for a company that pays you less than you were making. Meanwhile, your house, your mortgage payment are unchanged. You don't have the money to pay for everything. A deflationary event becoming a depression is a very, very bad thing for an economy. And China has been in a depression where wages and prices began to free fall. So China wound up having to dump a bunch of money in its economy. Unlike us, we've sparked inflation in this economy. China needed inflation. They threw a bunch of money into the economy, but here's the problem. The money in China went to local governments that began lending that money to others who made bad loans, and they couldn't repay the loans even with that much money flowing into the economy, which caused further economic calamity, exacerbated the depressionary situation in China, and now they've got food shortages. We're all focusing on China at war with us, whether we want to believe it or not, and the Chinese economy is collapsing before our eyes. And remember, the Chinese government rigs the numbers to make stuff look good. And when the Chinese government can't even rig the numbers to make it look good, that's a real problem. You know things are bad. But now on the other side of the globe from China and the Asian markets is Europe. Mario Draghi was Italy's prime minister. He was a well-respected economist. Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the European Commission, asked Mario Draghi to form a commission and study competitiveness. Here's the reason why. You got to understand this. Let me give you the very basic data. There is no European Union company with a market capitalization over 100 billion euros that's been set up from scratch in the last 50 years. While all 6 U.S. companies with a valuation over 1 trillion euros have been created within the last 50 years. You got this? Let me say this again. And I'm going to use dollars because there's a rough equivalent here. There's not a single company in the European Union with a capitalization of over $100 billion. In other words, there's not a single European Union company worth more than $100 billion that's been set up from scratch in the last 50 years. All 6 U.S. companies with a valuation over $1 trillion have been created within the last 50 years. In other words, the only companies in Europe that are valued at more than $100 billion have been around since at least World War II. While the 6 biggest American companies have only been around for the last 50 years. Why? European competitiveness. So Mario Draghi does this big report. And he says Europe must profoundly refocus its collective efforts on closing the innovation gap with the U.S. and China, particularly advanced technologies. Europe is stuck in a static industrial structure with few companies rising up to disrupt existing industries or develop new growth engines. There's not enough academic institutions achieving top levels of excellence, and the pipeline for innovation and commercialization is weak. There are regulatory barriers to scaling up that are particularly onerous in the tech sector for young companies. Now, I'm going to get rid of the jargon here, and I just want to talk to you. It's something I've said a lot since the gathering when we had a discussion about it on stage. The complexity of government is a subsidy to the wealthy. As I said in the last half hour, the bigger the government share of GDP is, the less the private sector can grow. As government consumes more of our economic resources, there's less economic resources for the private sector. The private sector can do more with less. The government is inherently more inefficient than the private sector. So the less the government does, the more capital can move efficiently. And as complex and bureaucratic as our government is, we have nothing on the European Union. Apple is in hot water in the European Union. I know I'm not going to talk about the new iPhone. Yes, I'm going to order it. But Apple is degrading services in the European Union. Intentionally so, I might add. The reason is because the European Union has such burdensome technology laws and requirements and privacy concerns. They've demanded Apple make compromises to their software that the Europeans say will open Apple up and allow people to run things on Apple's devices that Apple itself doesn't want you to run. Apple says it degrades the user experience. It makes your iPhone vulnerable to snooping. It risks your privacy overall while allowing the government to snoop, and it's not going to go along with it. So all new Apple products coming forward are going to limit features in the European Union. Let me read for you part of this Draghi report. First, complex and costly procedures across fragmented national systems discourage inventors from filing intellectual property rights, hindering young companies from leveraging the single market. Second, the European Union's regulatory stance towards tech companies hampers innovation. The EU now has over 100 tech-focused laws and over 270 regulators active in digital networks across member states. Many EU laws take a precautionary approach, dictating specific business practices to avert potential risks. For example, the AI Act imposes additional regulatory requirements on general-purpose AI models that exceed a predefined threshold of computational power, a threshold that some state-of-the-art models already exceed. Third, digital companies are deterred from doing business across the EU via subsidiaries as they face heterogeneous requirements, a proliferation of regulatory agencies, and gold plating of EU legislation. Now, what does this mean? In this country, because of our interstate commerce rules, if a company does business across the nation, the federal government gets to regulate it. In the European Union, the European governmental system gets to regulate, and then the subsidiary individual countries get their own regulations as well. So you're not just complying with one regulatory structure, you're complying with the regulatory structures of every country in Europe and the European Union on top of it. And then here's what the nanny state bureaucrats of the European Union are doing. This is what Draghi's getting at with the AI Act. The AI Act is requiring that if you use artificial intelligence, you have to comply in such a way that exceeds the computational ability of the models. In other words, you can't develop artificial intelligence programs in the European Union because the computational power that would be required to do the initial computations to comply with the government don't exist. There's not enough power. The result is that to do AI in Europe, you have to offload capacity to the United States, and then when it comes back into Europe, you've got to do all sorts of compliance on it. It becomes extremely, extremely disadvantageous in Europe. Now, why? This gets back to the cost of doing business. There's more regulation in Europe because you have not just, for lack of a better term, federal regulators at the European Union level, but also the individual country level regulators. Because the countries have refused to give up all of their sovereignty. So in this country, when we formed in the late 1700s, we had 13 individual nations. And those individual nations agreed that they would give up certain powers. This is the thing so many people miss. The states in this country are not autonomous regions of the United States. They're semi-sovereign nations. This is why, for example, the federal government cannot pass a law prohibiting non-citizens from voting at the local level. Because in our federal system, the states get to control their own systems. And their local elections are within their own systems. Therefore, the federal government can't regulate it because the state is a semi-sovereign nation. But the federal government also and the founders understood that when a business begins to spread from one state to the next and begins to do business across the lines of those semi-sovereign nations, there needs to be one set of rules at the federal level that govern as opposed to the local level. There are always some local level compliance issues with torts and things like that, but for actual business compliance, interstate commerce becomes a thing. In the European Union, they haven't gotten rid of their individual commerce rules. So they have an interstate commerce rule for businesses that do business at the European level, but then all of these businesses also have to comply with the individual rules at the nation state level as well. It becomes massively bureaucratic. And then on top of that, there's something else. He writes in this report, while the European Union boasts a strong university system on average, not enough universities and research institutions are at the top. Do you know why? So I did a program years ago in Germany. And one of the things I learned in the program is that the German people who were in this group with me, we were all under 40 years old. We were all in our 30s. None of them liked German universities. And you know why? Because they were free. The European Union elevated free secondary education, or free university education, rather. The result was that you can float in and out of college as long as you want. And so the colleges treat it like that. There's not an aggressive 4-year plan to then get your degree and go out into the workforce. There's a float in and out as much as you want. People take college for granted. There's not a competitive nature there. The European Union has done everything it can to kill competition because it thought competition was bad. This country valued competition, and the result has been this country is better economically than China, better economically than Japan, and better economically than every country in Europe. Because in this country, right now, and the Democrats would love to change this, it's part of the stakes of this election, and right now in this country, we value individual competition in the free market more than any other country in the world. And the result is that our country has the most profitable companies and the most well-off middle class of any country on the planet. Because we know what it takes to innovate. We have an entrepreneurial class. And China, to the extent they had one, Xi Jinping has killed it. And the European Union has smothered its entrepreneurs in a bunch of regulations. In other words, we need to keep being American and stop trying to be more like the rest of the world. All right, I got to move on to other topics. Before I move on to other topics, however, I need to remind you about my great friends and our advertisers, Americans for Prosperity. They do tank. They're not a think tank. They go into the states and they do the business of the conservative movement. So if you sign up for Americans for Prosperity, they're the leading largest grassroots group on the right. You sign up for them. They're going to teach you how to make a persuasive case to your friends, your family, and even your government on free markets and competition and families. Like school choice, for example, is a great innovator. School choice brings competition into the government classroom and improves all schools, including the public schools. And AFP's got all the data. They've also got all the data on why we need a secure border, and they teach you how to make those arguments to your local government, your state government, your friends and your family. All you got to do is go to americansforprosperity.org, americansforprosperity.org. You go sign up with Americans for Prosperity. You become a leader in the movement to fight for free markets and free people in this country. You become a leader advancing common sense conservatism. They give you the arguments, the data, the tools, and the training to be really effective. They've got chapters in almost every state. So go to americansforprosperity.org today, americansforprosperity.org. Sign up with them today. Greetings. Welcome. It's Eric Erickson here. All right. I was going to talk about something else, but this just hit the wires. Remember, Kamala Harris, she was in charge of the border until it became inconvenient. She was the border czar. News outlets referred to her as the border czar. ABC News, which denied she was the border czar, in multiple reports referred to her as the border czar at the time. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement's Baltimore, Maryland office has announced the arrest of their 153rd illegal alien sex offender for this fiscal year. The man is a 2 times deported Honduran national who re-entered the United States illegally as a gotaway and has been convicted of raping a Maryland resident. 153, not illegal aliens, but 153 illegal alien sex offenders. This is a statement from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Quote, "This is a landmark arrest for ICE Baltimore in that they secured a record 153 non-citizen sex offenders arrested in their area of operations during a single fiscal year. But more importantly, there are 153 victims who need not fear their predators because of these arrests. The arrest highlights the amazing enforcement actions performed." It also highlights Kamala Harris's failure. In Baltimore, Maryland, I need you to focus on this. In Baltimore, Maryland, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement has hit a record 153 illegal alien sex offenders. Not 153 illegal aliens, but 153 illegal alien sex offender arrests. And their latest was deported twice, came back a 3rd time as a gotaway, and has been convicted of raping a Maryland resident. That's Kamala Harris's record on border enforcement. That's the Biden-Harris record, and she needs to own that on the debate stage against Donald Trump. That is failure. Good grief. All right, folks, I'll talk to you all tomorrow.